Hello, children of the corn of economics. Let's do the answers to Portfolio Questionnaire 6. The first few questions are simply data questions, and the purpose is to get you to 1. Figure out how to find economic indicators, and also to help you realize that it's best to go to the source that I'm going to show you, which is the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So all you need to do is to Google ABS, and the first link that will come up is the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Now if we click on that link, it takes us here. And luckily for us, on its front page, it gives you links to the key things that we're asking about. The first one is what were we asking about? The unemployment rate. So where can we find that? Oh, looky look, there's the unemployment rate. So this is showing the unemployment rate for November 2018. By the time you answer your portfolio questionnaire, it might be different to that. The Australian Bureau of Statistics may have done its labour market survey and collected more data. But for now, the latest data shows that it's 5.1, meaning that of the labour force, and the labour force is composed of all those people who are employed in legal work and all those people who are actively seeking and are willing to start immediately legal work. That's the labour force. Of them, 5.1% of them are unemployed. That is, actively seeking work but don't have it. Okay, that's easy enough. What about the inflation rate? Well, the inflation rate is can be measured in different ways because it depends on which price index we're interested in. Are we interested in a general price index that includes the prices of all goods and services produced in the economy? Are we interested in the a producer price index, which looks at the prices of inputs used by producers? Or are we interested in the final goods and services that are purchased by households? That is a consumer price index. I'm going to go for the consumer price index. It's the most relevant one to the vast majority of people in the country, so we'll focus on that. Also, it's the price index which is most used by economists in gauging what's happening with prices in the economy. All right, so here we've got it here. It's 1.9%, but look what that says, 1.9% for the September quarter 2018. So, all right, let's just click on it to double check we're getting the right thing here. All right, now we've got here all groups, the CPI for all groups, and there's all different kinds of products, goods and services that households purchase. So for all groups, that's what we're interested in. It says for the period from June 2008 to September 2008 that the prices overall for these goods increased by 0.4%. But we're not interested in that. We're interested in how much has it changed over the course of the year. So if we look at this one, September 2017 to September 2018, that's a year. That's what we're looking for. And it's increased by 1.9%, as it said on the front page. And interestingly, you can then look at, well, what are the contributors here? So you can see that for some goods, some categories of goods, the prices have actually fallen, such as for clothing and footwear, for furnishings and household equipment and services, and for communications. They have all fallen in price. However, the other categories have all risen in price by more than these categories have fallen. So overall, the price index has risen. Okie doke. And the last estimate we're looking for is the annual GDP growth rate, or the annual economic growth rate. So we can see here we've got gross domestic product 0.3%. It's increased by 0.3%, but for what period? Well, it says here quarterly change. So it's increased by 0.3% for this quarter in the economic cycle. We're not interested in that. We're interested in the annual growth rate. So we'll click on inside and see what we've got. Here we've got the GDP, chain volume measure. So this is measuring real GDP, so it's measuring the volume of the increase in output produced in the economy, and we're looking for it over the course of a 12-month period. So then we've got the June to September, 0.6, but we're not interested in that. We want over the course of 12 months. So from September 2017 to September 2018, that's what we want. And it's 3% change. So we would say that's the trend rate, 3%. The seasonally adjusted rate is 2.8%. So seasonally adjusted means we've eliminated any blips, outlier blips, which are due to some kind of seasonal factor. Okay, and it's 2.8%. You can use either one of those, the trend or the seasonally adjusted. So in answer to these questions, you will be putting in the best estimate you can find. And what it should be is the unemployment rate should be around about 5%. The inflation rate should be around about 2%. And the growth rate should be around about 3%. The next question is how much is GDP by the expenditure method of calculation? So by the expenditure method of calculation, GDP is consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. So you just plug in the data. It's pretty straightforward. So 200 plus 50 plus 60 plus 10 minus 20 equals 300. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. How much are net exports? Net exports are exports minus imports. So 10 minus 20. 10 minus 20 is negative 10. Again, very simple. The next one is a true or false question. Economic growth is measured by changes in real GDP. So real GDP is the volume of legal production which occurs in within an economic region, usually a politically defined economic region such as a country or a nation, over a given period, normally say over a year or 6 months or a quarter of a year. Anyway, so it's the change in that volume. It's very simple. It's just the new period real GDP minus the old period real GDP over the old times 100. Very, very simple. This is economic growth. Second true-false question. Net exports increase when imports decrease. This is true. if we've got exports minus imports equals net exports, if we decrease M, then all other things remaining equal, namely exports, then net exports will rise. So for example, we had this scenario. Net exports equals 50 minus 40. Net exports equal 10. Straightforward enough. And let's then say imports decrease from 40 to 20. Net exports increase to 30. Simple. Next true-false. Nominal GDP reflects the distribution of income in an economy. No, it doesn't. It's a nominal GDP, and real GDP for that matter, are aggregates. So we're aggregating all of the legal production which occurs within the economy in a given period of time. We're not seeing how it's distributed. So let's say we take the example of here's the economic growth rate of China. You can see it's very high in 2010 and still into 2011 it's very high, and then it's declined a little bit. Can we see from this growth rate these increases in real GDP, these increases in production, and therefore presumably increases in income? Can we see who is ultimately getting the income from that production? No, you can't see that. Of course not. In fact, in 2011, 2012, when the growth rate was very high, we have this headline from the newspaper China Daily, call for fairer income distribution in China. Incidentally, China Daily is not some kind of rebel institution. It's part of the publicity department of the Communist Party of China. So you have the President of China himself saying in a speech back in 2012 that really we should be paying more attention to GDP per capita and reflecting on where the benefits of these, at that time, very high levels of economic growth, where the benefits are accruing, who is gaining the benefits there. And the concern was that they were mainly going to a relatively small strata of very wealthy people in China. So that's that. The next one, GDP includes unpaid housework. No, GDP does not include unpaid housework. Why? Well, you could ask a larger political question or a question about the nature of the way in which economists historically have conceptualized the economy and so on. That's one way of thinking about the why. Another way of thinking about the why is a more simple one, and that is that it's simply not part of the definition of GDP. You can then ask, well, why is this the definition? But anyway, it's not part of the definition of GDP. GDP is referring to the production of legal goods and services which are to be sold in a market. Unpaid housework is like volunteer work that people do in the economy, is not counted because it's not, although it does involve the production of something, either goods or services, it doesn't involve production for sale in the marketplace. Okay? And that's what GDP is trying to capture. So you can use different approaches to trying to measure GDP, and you can see in these approaches that they're automatically going to be excluding things like unpaid housework and voluntary work that people might do for the community as a whole or for other people who might be disadvantaged. So GDP using the expenditure approach is derived as the sum of all final expenditures, changes in inventories, and exports of goods and services less imports of goods and services. Okay? So it's about expenditure here. Right? So if you're producing something and you're not charging money for it, there's no expenditure to acquire it. So it gets excluded. GDP using the income approach is derived as the sum of compensation of employees, gross operating surplus for businesses, gross mixed income, and taxes less subsidies on the production and imports. Again, you can see this is about income. So compensation for employees, for example, or profits. So again, unpaid housework doesn't generate an income in itself because it's unpaid. By definition, it's not going to be captured by this method. And GDP using the production approach is derived as the sum of gross value added for each industry at basic prices plus taxes less subsidies on products. So again, you could say, aha, well, this is getting closer, isn't it? Because here we're just talking about the production of something. Well, not quite, because it's the productions of goods and services which add value. All right, you could still say unpaid labor adds value. But how do we measure the value? We measure the value by selling the product for each industry. So here we have to be thinking in terms of an industry category. What's the industry for unpaid housework? There isn't really an industry for that. And remember, it's at basic prices. What are those basic prices for unpaid housework? It doesn't have a basic price. Okay? So again, this method is not going to capture unpaid housework. And that's intentional. It's not some kind of accidental oversight. It's meant to exclude unpaid housework. It's meant to exclude voluntary work that's done. Which is not to say that the Bureau of Statistics doesn't collect information about unpaid housework and the work done by non-profit organisations and other kinds of voluntary work. I think the last estimate I saw of the attempt to estimate all of the unpaid work, all of the unpaid production which occurs in the Australian economy, it was something like half the value of real GDP. Question 5, true-false question. The circular flow of income is in equilibrium when injections are greater than leakages. So before we get to the answer to this, let's remind ourselves of the circular flow of income. We've got businesses and households making up the core of the economy, and then we've got the state, which engages in taxation and government expenditure, and we've got financial enterprises, which hold the savings of households and lend money for investment purposes. So the businesses will pay money to the resource owners or households in exchange for their resources. But before that income, all of that income gets to the households, some of it is siphoned off by the state in form of tax. All right. With the what happens to the remainder, the disposable income that goes to the households? Well, they'll save a bit of it. They'll spend a bit of it on imported goods, and they will spend the rest on domestically produced goods, consumption spending on domestically produced goods. So far, so good. So businesses will receive revenue in the form of consumption expenditure, but that's not the only source for them. They'll also receive revenue from exports for the goods and services they produce and sell overseas. Also, they will borrow money from financial enterprises in order to purchase capital goods from other businesses. And finally, the government will also engage in expenditure. It will purchase goods and services from businesses in order to provide essential services, public works, and so on. There are the leakages from the circular flow: tax, savings, imports. And there are the injections back into the circular flow: government spending, investment spending, and export revenue. If we put some numbers on it, we can see what's going on in equilibrium. Say the income is $100. $25, let's just keep it in simple numbers. $25 is taken in tax. So the remaining $75 goes to the households. What do they do with it? Well, let's say they save $10 and they spend $15 on imported goods. So we've got leakages. The leakages from the economy at this stage, taxes, savings, and imports, is $50 from the original 100. And that means the other 50 is injected back into the circular flow as consumption spending on locally produced goods and services. Let's say there's $15 in export revenue generated that's injected back into the system. Let's say the state takes the $25 in tax and injects it back into the system, $25, in order to buy schools and hospitals and roads and things like that. And let's say of the savings, those $10 in savings are injected back into the system because they're borrowed by businesses to buy capital equipment from other businesses. So the injections back into the system, the government expenditure, the investment spending and exports, is also equal to 50. So we can see that leakages equals injections. How much is being injected? How much goes back into the system after we've gone round the cycle once? We've got 50 plus 25 plus 10 plus 15 is injected back in. So what happens? That re-injects 100 back into income for the households, and then the whole thing just starts again. And then it goes around again, 100 back injected back in, and so on. In this case, we would say the economy is in equilibrium. It's kind of like in stasis.
Every child is afraid of the dark, the unknown, the nightmare. In Gatlin, Nebraska, that nightmare is in the corn. Stephen King's Children of the Corn.
Praise God! Praise the Lord!
From Stephen King, the author of Carrie, The Shining, The Dead Zone, and Christine, an adult nightmare. Children of the Corn.
I'm here, Lord! I'm ready!
Stephen King's Children of the Corn, an adult nightmare.